I am Virgil Hollender. I was a DP2 on the USS Simon Lake. Well, it was the Vietnam era. I had a fairly low draft number at the time. It was kind of scary, kind of confusing. You saw all this stuff going on in Vietnam. I always grew up believing that earlier generations served. My father served. Somebody we called Grandpa Mickey, who was a step-grandfather on my father's side. He was a World War I veteran. So I took it as my duty to serve. I wasn't sure I wanted to be an infantryman in Vietnam, but I also knew, you know, I spoke with the recruiters. There was no guarantees I was going to stay out of Vietnam. Matter of fact, still was fairly likely I would go, or at least I'd serve on a ship that would be in the area. And it worked out so that I wasn't. But I had classmates from high school who went in. I had classmates from high school who went to Canada not to go in. My number was low. I might not have been called, but I probably would have. I kind of figured I'd probably be drafted anyway, so I started talking to recruiters from several of the branches, and kind of boiled it down to Navy or Air Force. Quite frankly, the Air Force recruiter seemed to be treating me like he would be doing me a favor letting me join. Since I was already into computers, I was interested in following up with that, and the Navy seemed to be interested in those talents and said if I provided certain information, it would probably be, I would be designated for that. No guarantees. Well, I got him the information and I went in designated. So then I went to boot camp like everybody else, had to learn everything from firefighting to knot tying to lots of other things. We reported to Philadelphia, my group, for induction and swearing in and all that stuff. They took half of our group right after that, took them right to the airport, put them on the plane, and they got to Great Lakes that day. And then they took the other half, the half I was in, and put us on a train to Chicago, where it took, it was an overnight train. We actually had sleeper compartment. And we had access to the bar and all that stuff on the train on the way up. And we took advantage of that. It was an interesting train ride. And then we got to Chicago. They transferred us to another train, then to a bus that took us right up to the base. And we got off the bus there, and it was just like everybody else, you know. Right away, fall in, and they started the regimen of turning you into military people. Great Lakes, Illinois. 2274. Nervousness, a lot of nervousness, a lot of not knowing exactly what to expect. But there was somebody who told me, and I don't remember exactly who it was. It was somebody I think had recently gotten out of the military, probably a neighbor. Anyway, he said, when you go into boot camp, blend into the wall. Don't stand out for being really good. Don't stand out for being bad, definitely. Just middle of the road, blend into the wall, you'll do just fine. And I kept that in my mind. I remember clearly getting the shots. I remember getting my head shaved. By the way, boot camp was the only time I really had short hair. If you saw the picture on my pink ID card, the one where I got out, I don't know how they let me out with the hair that long. Usually they make you get a haircut before you get out when it's that long. But they didn't. Yeah, and you know, you went through all the same things everybody else did, learning all the skills. Uh, you know, I like to remind people that, yeah, we had to shoot, we had to tie knots, we had some book training, we had marching, we had all that stuff. But also we had fire training, because you get out there on a ship, you don't call the fire department, you put it out, and everybody had to be ready to take part in that. You know, I often tried to remember whether we used the foam also that has made all the news. But I remember, you know, learning the basics of firefighting, aim the hose at the base of the fire. You know, there was the nozzle man and the guy behind, and we would switch positions so that we all had the opportunity to fight the fire. The thing that would stand out more, though, was going through the gas. They had you go through the gas with the gas mask on, okay, that's fine. And then they make you take it off and stand there for a little bit, and then they let you get out. And oh, it teared, it stunk, it was terrible. And I remember when I got out of there, I said, you know what? I will never complain about a fart again in my life. And I haven't. We all got along. It was, you know, we were all in the same boat, trying to figure out what's going to happen next, what's going on, trying to learn. I remember sitting on the floor. Matter of fact, in my boot camp book, there's actually a picture there of me sitting on the floor with one of my shipmates from boot camp, studying a manual we had to study. The company I was in actually won the Intelligence Award for our battalion. You know, everybody has to qualify, but there's also awards for the best and all that. We just barely qualified at marching. We had, I guess, as a company, I don't think me in particular, but as a company, I guess we had 2 left feet. But we won the intelligence. We were all just trying to figure out things. Some of us screwed up at times, including me. And he said, and then I put it back in my head that, wait, I'm supposed to blend into the wall. And I guess I blended in enough, because at the end towards the end of boot camp, when we're getting ready to graduate, my parents came up with my siblings and to see the graduation. I think that was the first time my father set foot on anything Navy since he had gotten out. And anyway, I had some liberty on Friday when they got there, and I got to spend some time with them. Then they came, and I thought we'd spend some time in the rec hall when I didn't have to stand my watch, because I had the duty on the actual Saturday, I guess it was. And company commander says, Hollender, what do you got duty? And I told him, he says, you think you could switch it with somebody? So I said, I'll try. And sure enough, somebody switched so that I got the midnight watch, fire watch for the company. And here comes another screw up. Okay, now I just spent the day with Liberty with my parents running around, and boot camp is tiring enough, and now I'm standing the fire watch. You got to stay awake. I did that. I went to wake up my relief 15 minutes before, just like we were supposed to, and he was getting up, and I made the mistake of sitting down. He had the rack next to mine. I made the mistake of sitting down on mine, and as soon as I sat down, I must have gone out. Because then he woke up a couple other guys who wrapped me up with rope and then yelled, "Attention on deck!" And of course, I can't stand up with all this. And they all got a big kick out of it. And me, I just kind of wound the rope off of me. And I guess I could have been in trouble because I wasn't officially relieved yet. But then again, I had woke up my relief, so I guess it wasn't too bad. It never got to the company commander, or boot camp, what in a lot of the other services call drill sergeant, but it never got to him that happened. They just got a kick out of it. And me, I took the rope off myself and fell right back to sleep. I was interested in staying in computers because I was in that. I was actually, when I went in, I was working for New Jersey Motor Vehicles in their computer department. It was mainly tabulating machines back then, but yeah. I had also been to a school for it, and I got them the information on that, and they pre-designated me to be computers. Now, where I was going, I had no idea until I got my orders right at the end of boot camp. I didn't go to an A school because I had the background in data processing, as they called it back then. And so I went right to ComServLand, Commander Service Forces Atlantic Fleet. Their headquarters was actually on what was at the time Commander-in-Chief Atlantic Fleet's compound, which was separate from NOB Norfolk. But our computer office was on NOB Norfolk, right off of Pier 7. So there was lots of going back and forth with information, punch cards, computer listings, that kind of stuff. At first I was just an E3, I wasn't making any money. I got part-time jobs when I wasn't on duty, including a place called Ocean View Amusement Park. That could be a story in itself. But, and driving cabs sometimes. I do remember coming home one time from Norfolk and wearing my uniform to a high school football game for my own high school. And actually getting mocked and actually being called names by some there. Not any of my classmates, but some. It was not a pleasant time. That was the only time I wore my uniform to it. I went back to several other high school games over the years, but it's the only time I wore my uniform there. We were off in our own little world, you know, what I did. A lot of the ships came and went. I actually bumped into people. One of my friends from high school came in on the Kennedy, and we got together. I got to interact. I wouldn't say make friends with, because we interacted and then lost touch with each other. But I interacted a lot with people. One of the funny stories from, I guess, from my shore duty days, I guess I was still in E3 at the time. I don't think I'd made it E4. I was fairly new. I was already doing some of the programming as well as some of the operation of the computer. But the chief, one of the carriers pulled in. If I tell you the name of the carrier, I'll probably make a mistake, but I know it was one of the two. Anyway, one of the carriers pulled in, a smaller carrier. Pulled up to Pier 7. Our office was right off of Pier 7. The chief had got a couple of the guys, told me to grab a couple boxes, and we put them in the back of the pickup truck, the department pickup truck. He said, take it over to the pier, which is about as far as from here to the stop sign, leaving the parking lot here where we're at. It wasn't very far to the pier, and then you drove up the pier by the brow. And I get out and take one of the boxes. I was told it was a swapping of supplies. So I carry one of the boxes up the brow, and that's my first time ever doing it. Request permission to come aboard. I salute the ensign first, do that stuff. And the OD says, asked me what, and I told him I'm supposed to swap some supplies with your computer division. Oh, okay, do you know where it's at? No, sir. All right, I'll call them. They had somebody come up, and they helped, and we brought some supplies in, out, and when we were done swapping those things, they said, "Ah, have a cup of coffee, tell us what there is to see here in Norfolk." So I'd go down, sipping on some coffee, we're just shooting the shit, as they say in the Navy, and all of a sudden I hear, "Shift colors." Now, maybe I was only an E3 that hadn't been stationed on a ship yet, but I knew what that meant. And I probably turned white as a ghost. And I looked at them. I said, "No. Where are we going?" And they just started laughing. And I jump up, and I go out to the hangar deck, and you can see us pulling away from the pier. And they are laughing. And all these thoughts are going through my head. I know what the punishment is for ship's movement. They taught us that in boot camp. But what's my punishment for being on a ship when it gets underway and I'm not supposed to be? By the way, I'd like to tell people that I was never stationed on an aircraft carrier, but my first time ever getting underway was on one. And the last time, to date, that I've gotten underway on a Navy ship is also a carrier. But I was never stationed on one. So I'm thinking, oh, I guess I'm going to have to try to get off with the pilot. I knew about harbor pilots. I don't remember why. That means I'm going to have to go up to the bridge. I'm going to have to face the commanding officer. I'm in so much trouble. And they're just laughing at me. And we pull out from the pier, and then we pull around to the other side of the pier. And when they drop they tie up, they drop the brow, I go straight to the brow, request permission to leave the ship. It's not Liberty Call yet. "Sir, I don't belong on this ship. See that pickup truck down there? That's what I belong in. And that pier, that building at the end of the pier, that's what." "Then what were you doing on board?" "Sir, it's a long story. I don't think you want to hear it." He just looked at me and shook his head, granted, and I go down the brow, and I get in the pickup truck, and I go back. I pick up one of the boxes and take it in, and the chief says, "Hollender, what the hell took you so long?" And now I'm an E3, and he's a chief. And I said, "Chief, don't give me that shit. And you can get somebody else to carry these boxes in." And I put it down, and I went over to my desk and he just was laughing. So, needless to say, I believe I was set up. And they had a lot of fun with it, and I got underway. So after just about 2 years there, I was then rotated, got my new duty assignment, and it was to the USS Simon Lake. Backing up for a second, though, there was a second class who was my duty section leader, and right now his name escapes me, but when his rotation came up in Norfolk, he got orders for Vietnam, which was shocking to him, to us actually too. But it just went to show that nobody was safe in those days. You got the orders, you got the orders. And he wound up at a gunboat base up the Da Nang River. Anyway, leaping forward, I got to Simon Lake. And the Simon Lake was a fleet ballistic missile subtender at the time. So they kept it far away from Vietnam. When I reported to it, it was in Bremerton, Washington, finishing up a major overhaul. It was, as a matter of fact, the first time I looked at it, walked to it, walked up to it to report on board, it was in dry dock. And that's a strange way to see your ship for the first time. But a couple days later, it was back in the water. As I said, it was finishing up. We spent a few months still in Bremerton, and then eventually got underway and started heading down the West Coast. By the way, because of the nature of the ship, especially the center of the ship had a pretty flat bottom. That's to allow for the missile break. And we hit the Pacific Ocean. The surface did not look rough, but there was apparently a bunch of underwater turbulence that had us rolling from side to side. Not much up and down motion, a lot of side to side. I wish I still had the pictures, because I took a picture of it. Once, one of the pictures, I leveled it with the horizon, and you could see the ship on an angle like that. Or I would level it with the ship, and you saw the horizon like that. It was pretty amazing. But after about a day of that stuff, which got a bunch of the sailors on board seasick, and surprisingly not me, we eventually got to calmer waters. On the way down, we had to do a medical evacuation for somebody with appendicitis. The Coast Guard came out to take him off the ship. And then when we got off of, that was by San Francisco. But no, we didn't pull into San Francisco. Then when we were by LA, a Navy helicopter came out to take somebody off from our division who had a death in the family, so it was a bereavement situation. We did a lot of loop-de-loops going down there. They were testing out maneuvering, we were firing the guns for the first time since the overhaul, all that kind of stuff. We also noticed these fishing trawlers that followed us part of the time. They were the famous Soviet fishing trawlers. And then after a while, the fishing trawlers disappeared, and there was a Soviet cruiser following us for a little while. That was the good old Cold War days, not just Vietnam. When we got down way off the California coast, I think that's an area that they used for practice firing. But I quickly learned that I enjoyed being out at sea. Especially, you know, when I didn't have something to do in the evening, going out on deck when we got to the warm weather, I enjoyed it, watching the stars. But we got down by Acapulco, and we actually pulled into Acapulco, Mexico, and had 3 days of liberty. What they did was 3-section duty. So everybody got 2 days off, and 1 day they had to stay on the ship. That was a lot of fun. Saw the cliff divers, did a lot of drinking. And yeah, it was fun. And then we took some more time to get down to the Panama Canal, pulled in there, and only a certain percentage of the ship got liberty there, and it was only for 12 hours. But got to see a little bit of Panama City. And also got to taste a lot of drinks. And that is also where I got Montezuma's revenge. I had heard a lot of stories about it. I was so careful in Acapulco. And me and my friends from the ship, we were walking down this one street, and there was a pizza place. And there were a bunch of American military in there. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and they're all having pizza. And they're there with their families. It looks like, oh, it must be a safe place. Well, they were stationed there. Their systems had gotten used to the food. Ours had not. So not long after getting back to the ship, we were all very sick for about 24 hours or so. But still enjoyed going through the Panama Canal. It's an amazing thing to see. So much so that I had to bring my wife back on a fun cruise. Just recently, as a matter of fact. But anyway, so from there the ship went on to Charleston, which would become our new home port. But before we settled in, we had to spend a few weeks at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, going through the fleet training exercises. normally you get a weekend liberty one of the weekends you're there. They canceled ours because they used our ship to fix the chase sub down there that had some problems. So they pulled us into the pier. Anybody involved in fixing it was fixing the submarine. Anybody not involved in that was going through import drills from real early till real late every day. But after it was done being fixed, they canceled our weekend of liberty at one of the nice places in the Caribbean because we were behind on our training, supposedly. Instead, we got a few hours at one of the base picnic areas. Now, I didn't have to stand many military watches because I was a programmer at the time, and on the Simon Lake, I was the ship's programmer. But one of the military watches I had to stand, I got stuck with shore patrol for that picnic, which was okay. It just meant I couldn't drink the beer, but I could still eat the food. But it was what it was. Maybe it was good that I didn't get to go swimming because some of them got stung by sea urchins when they went in. Anyway, after our time in Guantanamo Bay, the ship actually went up to New London, Connecticut, where there were fast attack submarines, and normally our ship didn't take care of that. My guess is it was a combination of things. One, we heard that the ship, the tender that was taking care of them, had some problems that had to be immediately addressed, and they took it offline to get fixed, and since we hadn't gone online in Charleston yet, they put us up there. But probably they wanted to make sure that we could all fix all of those ships, because some years later, the Simon Lake went from being a fleet ballistic missile tender to being a generic subtender. It actually took care of destroyers too. But getting back to New London, that was a good place for me to be, because the first time I had a chance, I think I took a bus back home, or maybe it was a train, but I came back home to Jersey, picked up my car, and then drove it up there so I could drive home every weekend while we were up there. The other thing was, I could finally get some good pizza for the first time since I had left the East Coast. After our, I don't know, maybe about 2 months in New London, where, by the way, our ship serviced the USS Nautilus while it was still in service. Then we went down to Charleston and relieved the ship that was down there, the tender that was there. And that's where the Simon Lake spent the rest of its time while I was on board. There are some stories about that time. I think one of the things, I find it amusing now. It wasn't amusing at the time. One morning, right after we got to the ship, and one of my roommates, I got a place off the ship. I was the ship's programmer. If I stayed on the ship, I'd quickly learn they would wake me up any time of the night, anytime there was something that even looked like a software problem. And, you know, instead of trying to work through it themselves or telling me in the morning. So I got a place on shore with some friends from other divisions, probably another smart thing I did. One morning, one of my roommates had first messenger of the watch, so we got there a little bit early. Anyway, not long after we got there, and I've got my first cup of coffee in my hand, he announced a security violation. And I thought, geez, it's awful early for those kind of drills. And they haven't even set the watch yet. Or they just, yeah, I guess they just set his watch. And not long after he announced that, he gets on and says security violation, followed by the gong, 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 gong. And this is not a drill. General quarters, all hands man your battle stations. Set condition 0, they're out the ship. I still can hear it. because you don't expect to go to general quarters sitting in port in Charleston, South Carolina. So everybody's looking at each other like, what? What just happened? I was wondering if World War III had just started. Others were too. Eventually, we found out that the Commodore of the fleet, the submarine fleet that we were servicing, decided to pull an unannounced drill on the ship. Gave a submarine sailor with a beard and all that an ID card of a commander that looked nothing like him, and a fake bomb that looked realistic, and said, see if he, and he was in civilian clothes too, see if you can get on the ship with this. If you do, put it by the missile break, and then see if you can get back off again. And he did all that. He then used one of the payphones. Remember those things? He used one of the payphones and called the quarterdeck number and said, I planted a bomb on your ship and I'm going to blow it to hell. Well, this was before my roommate came on duty. And apparently the messenger of the watch then hung up on him. Said, you're crazy, and hung up on him. Didn't tell anybody anything. Waited till the change of the watch. And the Commodore gave the guy another dime. Told him this time he has to talk to the officer in charge. Don't use terms like OD or anything like you know what you're talking about. And then tell the officer in charge you planted a bomb on the ship. My roommate answers the phone, and the guy says, let me talk to your officer in charge, I put a bomb on your ship. And he hands the phone to the OD and hits the security violation, announces that, thinking, he was thinking on his feet, thinking that if he does that, the security team would find a bomb pretty quickly, and they did. So, about the time they found the bomb, the CO came on board, knowing nothing about this, and they report in that they found a bomb. So the CO says, go to general quarters. It's also the way you're most able to handle damage to the ship or whatever. I think they were also trying to figure out how to quickly they could get the ship away from the weapons station. And they were getting ready to drop the brow when apparently the Commodore comes racing up. And that's when he told them it's just a drill. All this time, ship's company didn't know. They continued then to treat it like it was real. The rumor has it that the CO was a little miffed, to say the least, that he didn't even know this was happening. But they continued with the drill and did the things that they thought that they should do, short of actually pulling us away from the pier and cutting cold nuclear subs loose from us. So that was one of the exciting things that happened. Some of us noticed that those people involved in that, whether you're talking about the OD or the messenger of the watch, nobody remembers seeing them after that. We suspect that they at least had captain's mast and got in big trouble. Maybe, who knows, maybe even court-martialed, I don't know. You know, they didn't talk much about that. There was an episode on the Simon Lake way before I got there. I think some of the interviews, some of the talking that Admiral Ellis did about his career and his time on the Simon Lake. Well, while he was the CO of the Simon Lake over in Scotland, they actually arrested one of the crew members from the Simon Lake for spying for the Soviets. There were major incidents that happened. One of the things that happened constantly on the Simon Lake, which we all hated, a little bit before Liberty Call, every once in a while, it seemed like it was happening at least once a week for a while, they would give somebody an orange, iridescent orange type bag to carry around the ship. Well, those were only supposed to be used to carry nuclear materials, radioactive materials. And it was supposed to be escorted by a Geiger counter to make sure it wasn't, you know, and they would put it in those bags, and those were the only purpose you could have one of those bags. They would warn people, if you get a colored bag like that from the laundry ashore, don't bring it on the ship. So what they would do is they would give somebody one of those bags and have them walk around the ship. And every place they went before they were finally challenged and stopped, they would consider contaminated. And then they would have to clean up the contamination before anybody could go on Liberty Call. And they thought that would be a way of getting people to be really strong about, you know, enforcing that rule. Anybody that sees it, stop it, you know. It just went on and on and on. And eventually they put the Master-at-Arms force, somebody following them, and everybody who didn't challenge it properly got written up and at least went to the captain's mast. That was one of the reasons why one day when I had duty, I was just heading back up from the mess decks, having dinner down in the mess decks. And they call out a repel boarders drill. So I'd continue up ladder. It's the same sound as general quarters, only it's in port. It's announced as repel boarders. And I see one of the guys in my duty section standing at the hatch, holding it open, and that's the hatch we were supposed to dog down during repel boarders, or general quarters for that matter. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm waiting for him to get through." And I look out there, and there's a guy with civvies on running towards, saying, "Hold that hatch open." I said, "Do you know him?" He says, "No." I says, "Then close that effing hatch before you get us all court-martialed." Needless to say, we did not get court-martialed. We did close the hatch. That guy never came through that hatch, so I don't know what happened after that. There were lots of things like that that happened, but for the most part, we had a pretty good crew. I think that continued to get better. There was a big turnover when the ship left Scotland, got to the yards. Between it leaving Scotland, getting to the yards, and then getting ready to go back online again after the yards, I think 2/3 of the crew turned over. So there was the learning curve. And apparently, well, this fishing boat actually came up the river with a couple drunks on it. You could actually, they got close enough that you could tell they had some beer at the bottom. It was a little putt-putt outboard type thing. They had the fishing poles, all that stuff. And they had to have passed some signs that said restricted area, but kept coming. And they put extra signs up when the missile ops were going on. But they kept coming. And when they got into sight of the Marine officer who was on deck, he got on a megaphone, asked them to turn around and leave the area, but they were drunk and they just laughed, and they kept coming. And he warned them again. They said, "Yeah, okay, Gomer." That was the response from these drunks. And then the officer told me, he called a Marine with a rifle with a scope on it up next to him. And he warned them that if they kept approaching the ship, they would be fired upon. And they laughed. And he turned to the Marine. Oh, no, that's right. They laughed, yes, but they tied something white to the end of one of the fishing poles. And he turned to the Marine, and the Marine, at quite a distance, shot that right off the top of the fishing pole. And they turned around, and were putt-putting out of there as you saw a Navy boat, a Coast Guard boat, and a police boat approach them, and they did not treat them gently. That's a pretty interesting story that happened during my time on there. We also were recalled one day to the ship, and that was because they thought a hurricane was heading towards Charleston. That had us all scratching our heads because we couldn't fit under the bridge unless it was low tide. I don't think there's anything near a low tide when a hurricane's approaching. So, but unfortunately, the hurricane turned away, didn't come, and they canceled us trying to get out of there. Another time there was a recall because they thought we were going to get underway to go out, and one of the Apollo missions they thought was going to have to make an emergency landing in the Atlantic instead of the Pacific where they usually did. And there were news crews starting to come to the pier and, you know, trying to get on the ship, I guess. But about that time they canceled it and said, nah, never mind, they can land in the Pacific. That was an exciting time for those of us at the time who thought, oh wow, we're going to get to retrieve Apollo maybe. Other than that, my job on the ship was to keep the computers, the software working. We had a new system that actually was worked on by the command who had the computer room next to the one we had in Norfolk. I knew a lot of those people from interacting with them there. They developed a system, it was called MISSILE for short, Master Stock Status Listing. Had nothing to do with missiles, well, practically nothing to do. It was a way to track all the parts the ship needed for itself, the ship needed for the weapon systems for itself, the ship needed for any of the subs we serviced or any of their weapon systems. So anytime a part was used, they would generate a slip, it would come to our department, key punch people in our department would punch out the cards, and those cards would be used to go into the program. Yeah, this was the old punch card stuff. Go into the program that would then generate what is the accurate count of the parts that are needed. That was, and we also did payroll, personnel stuff, things like that. It was a good, interesting group of guys. We had some great poker games in our spaces because we were always air conditioned because of the computers and because the officers were afraid to open up the computer components to find where the beer was. The food was pretty good most of the time. I enjoyed breakfast the most when we were underway. But usually I didn't have breakfast except after a duty night where I had to stay on board. Not a full breakfast anyway. Lunches were usually pretty good, dinners were usually pretty good. There was one time though where we got underway for our 3-day quarterly out and back. And the ship went out, we were out quite a bit out in the Atlantic, and all of a sudden we stopped and they told us to stop using water. And apparently the intakes to the desalination process where they pull water in, since they weren't doing that while we were sitting in on station up the Charleston River in Charleston, was a school of catfish had made their homes there, and it was blocking the intake, so they couldn't make fresh water while we were underway. So they stopped everything, told us not to use the water, put divers over the side, and apparently the divers cleaned out the catfish from there. And they served catfish for dinner that night. And there weren't too many people that ate, not the catfish anyway, but that was the main course. They swore, no, this is not, this was pre-planned, this is not, but none of us believed it, so we didn't eat it. Now, having said that the food was pretty good, I remember we loved, when we were up in New London, there was a really good pizza place delivered to the ship. And when I had duty at night, often we'd chip in and get pizza delivered to the ship. were coming back from Gitmo. I think I mentioned, yeah, I mentioned the fact that nobody was happy about we had our Liberty canceled, Liberty weekend. Couple things happened. This I really wish I had pictures of, because this is one of those, without the pictures, I don't know how many people are going to believe this, but they actually, as we were leaving, I was up on the weather deck, and a guy from the plastic shop, together with one of the signalmen, approached the CO with requested permission to raise a special signal as we were passing the fleet training group. And it was a huge plastic hand. And I thought, and the CO said, granted with pleasure, and they raised that thing up and sounded the horn to make sure that the fleet training group headquarters people, got their attention. The other thing he did was, on the way back, he broke into some of the submarine stores, and we had some very good lobster tail and steaks on the way back. So yeah, that was some pretty good food. We had guns when I was on board that could not fire forward, not without taking out the superstructure of the ship. They were mounted aft. I understand that in certain situations after that they would mount some deck guns forward, but I'm not positive how that worked. But we only had the two twin mount 3-inch 50s. One of the twin mounts was manned by Marines, the other one by sailors. And we could fire out to the sides and rear. I guess the idea is if we were shooting our guns, we were running away. But we had those guns. What could we do? We could. It was said, and I believe it, that we could build a nuclear-powered submarine. We had all the parts pretty much on the ship. We had the metal shops, we had the welding shops, we had all those things, and we could build a submarine. We needed the dry dock that was attached to us, that we worked with, to have it out of the water to build it, but that was not our job. Our job was just to have so many parts that you could, in theory, do that. They repaired hulls. When one of the subs bumped into something, the propulsion, they repaired all of that stuff. A lot of times when the subs were alongside, the smoking lamp was turned off because they were moving torpedoes around, or even some of the smaller missiles, some of the tactical missiles instead of nuclear missiles. The missiles were their own little thing, and by missiles I'm talking about the ballistic nuclear missiles. If you weren't directly involved in the operation when they were loading or unloading missiles from the submarines, you weren't supposed to be on deck. I did go up there one time, though, to see, towards the end of my time. I figured, I'll go up there until they chase me off. What are they going to do? I'm getting out soon anyway. So I went up to watch. Well, it was XD division. That was the computer division. Mr. Veach was the division officer. I've been somewhat in touch with him. And he's constantly said, well, maybe I'll make the next reunion, but he hasn't yet. Chief Groff, really good guy, easy to get along with, could be very funny at times. I liked him. I think I got along well with him. Some of the other, well, there's Charlie Whitler, who was one of the people no, that's right, he did not make the Wildwood. The reunion before Wildwood, I think it was, he was at. And then he looked younger than me, healthier than me, and he died suddenly. Just as he was getting into coming to the reunions. then there's Carl Bess, who comes to the reunions. I'm still in touch with them. I remember the DS. He was the hardware repair guy. There were two of them. He was the lead guy. We called him Spaz. He was funny. He would not hesitate to stick his fingers in places, and then he'd get knocked across the room because they had all these capacitors that even after you unplugged the thing, it still had a charge. He'd get knocked across the room and get right up after shaking it off and go right back to the same thing. And sometimes on him fixing something, he'd get knocked across the room 2 or 3 times. That's why we called him Spaz. The other DS, his name escapes me at the moment. It shouldn't, because we were talking about it not too long ago. People from the ship. And anyway, somehow he avoided getting shocked like that. I don't remember all the names from my division. I remember there was Ron Papillon. He was the lead petty officer. He was the first class. A really good guy, a really nice guy. He stayed on the ship beyond when I was there. He went over to Rota, and then they got a new chief in there who brought in his own lead petty officer, and I think things changed around a lot in the division from talking to the guys. When I was on, they didn't mess with the computer guys because we had to keep those computers going, especially when we were on station servicing subs 24 hours a day. They had to keep bunch for long hours. If you were on duty, you might have been on the keep bunch machine all day and then continue well into the night just trying to keep up. So we did not stand normal ship's watches. We did not have to spend time in the mess decks doing those duties. So I never did that on the ship. But others, well, when the ship went to Rota and the new chief came in, apparently he did away with all that. Everybody had to stand all the normal ship's watches, and things changed a lot. Well, the CO had his own Marine, somebody who was with him and took care of that kind of stuff. Because we had the nuclear weapons on board, we had the Marine detachment on board. Generally speaking, we got along pretty well, although a lot of times the Marines stayed to themselves, the sailors stayed to themselves. The Marines that have been there for a while, you know, you could talk with them, you could joke with them. The only kind of negative interaction I had with a Marine on the ship was somebody who was brand new to the ship, obviously. He was a private, I think fairly fresh out of boot camp. And I was walking through the hatch with a cup of coffee in my hand, and as I'm partway through the hatch, he just comes barging through. I almost spilled my coffee, and that's a crime. And I just kind of turned around and looked at him like, what the? And this corporal who was following him said, something wrong? I said, just tell your buddy we try to be courteous with each other on the ship. And I moved on. I go up the ladder towards my division space, and he comes up behind me. You've got something to say. He's being a real tough Marine, you know. And I looked at his shoulder, and I looked down at my crow. I said, Private, I don't know how long you've been on the ship, but when the security alarm goes off, we will all get out of your way if you're part of that security team going through. And if any of the guys from my division don't, they're going to have hell to pay with me. But when there's no security alarm going off, we try to show each other courtesy. We're shipmates. And he's looking at me, you know, with almost like fire in his eyes. And I looked at his arm, I looked down at my girl, I said, do you understand what I'm saying, Private? And at that point, it's just, the military training in him kicked in. I outranked him. Aye, and he did an about face and walked away. And that was the end of it. Like I said, the rest of the time, you know, you always heard stories about the Marines and the Navy and the Army and all that getting into fights. I never experienced that. I suppose it happened, but I never experienced. I had drinks with Marines, I had drinks with Army, Air Force, not as much Air Force, Coast Guard, and British sailors. It was a big part, and I think big part, of the nuclear deterrent during the Cold War. We kept those subs working. We kept those sailors fed. We kept them with everything that they needed. And there was a lot of people on the ship that I served in. I mentioned the fact that I actually had roommates from other divisions, and they played a much bigger part in that than I did. I was the ship's programmer. They actually did stuff with metal and with all that stuff. It was one hell of a ship. The people that I spoke with who served on its immediate sister ship, the Canopus, and the Simon Lake was the first of its class. It was built in a different shipyard than Canopus. And they said, oh, the difference was night and day. It was so much better a ship. The quality of the ship was so much better. I think a lot of that led to morale on the ship being much better. Other than the fact that we'd get ticked off at these guys who wouldn't stop the guys with the orange iridescent bags. The morale was really good, most of the time. Although, don't get me wrong, we were in during the Vietnam era. Our song was, we gotta get out of this place. You know, a lot of people were anxious for their time to be over and get out. If I would have even extended, I would have been given a bonus, and I did consider it. I would have also stayed on the ship long enough to get to Rota, Spain, so I considered it. And I probably would have had enough time left in grade to go from E5 to E6. So I considered it. And then they said, you know, the personnel, because I did a lot of stuff for them, you know, I can let you out up to 2 months early. Then I stopped considering it. But I was going to go reserve. It was an unfortunate situation with a boss who did not like the fact that I would be reserve. Probably was not quite legal at the time, but it was what it was, and I was still young, I was still pretty naive. I should have probably fought it, but I didn't. My father's name was Henry Richard Hollender. I have his middle name. My son has his middle name. My grandson has his middle name. My first name is my grandfather's on my mother's side, though. Anyway, he was a radioman in the Navy during World War II. He enlisted not too long after Pearl Harbor. I think he had to finish school, and then he enlisted. Went to boot camp at Great Lakes. He did tell me that. Then he went to school where he learned to be a radioman, learned Morse code, all that stuff. And then got assigned to a brand new ship, the USS Crockett. He was a plank owner. They put the ship in service, they put it through its paces, and then took it around from the East Coast through the canal, I guess, and out to the Pacific. And they started shuttling the troops over to the islands. This was, at this point, you're talking about more towards the end of it. This wasn't the first few islands that they, when they were doing their island hopping, this was a little bit later on. He didn't talk much about that. As a matter of fact, he told me two things directly. And one was that his favorite Liberty port was when they were coming back after World War II, and it was Havana, Cuba. It was amazing, I guess, back then before Castro. The other thing he told me was, and this was, I think, after I went in the Navy, it was kind of a warning to follow orders. Since the radio men were at a premium in the Navy back then, I think he said there were only two on his ship, him and this other guy. If they were at general quarters, they were not allowed up on deck, even if they weren't actively involved in the radio at the time. And he said that he stuck his, he heard all the noise one day. This was as they were getting ready to land troops on one of the islands. I guess they were shooting the guns, but the bigger ships were shooting more. And they were getting ready to load the troops on. And he heard all this noise, and he opened the hatch to go out on the weather deck, and he said about that time, a piece of a Japanese plane went whizzing past his head. It had just been shot down, basically, but pieces of it hit the ship. He said he closed that hatch and followed orders from then on. That's the way he told the story. Now, after he passed away, I got a hold of his pictures that he took. And there was a picture of him with a basically bloody bruised face. And you could tell it was on the ship from the background. And then there's some other ships, pictures after he got off the ship. Apparently, he was sent to the hospital in the Philippines, because behind one of the pictures that he had taken where it was in the Philippines, he said, while at the hospital in the Philippines. And that had me look further. And I found on the logs from the USS Crockett that there was logged that the ship, while getting ready for operations, was attacked by a kamikaze. It was shot down before it made it all the way to the ship, but pieces struck the ship, minor damage, and a couple of minor casualties. My father did not get the Purple Heart, probably because he was where he wasn't supposed to be, even though he was injured as a result of combat. Maybe that's what he was trying to tell me. Follow orders, there's a reason for them sometimes. But those are the only two stories he told me. Now, I know the Crockett went on, it did a couple of landings. It also brought the troops that were part of the occupation force to Japan. There is a picture that I believe was taken in Tokyo Bay where all you see is a sea of ships. I believe the Crockett was there, Tokyo Bay, during the time of the surrender. Then eventually the Crockett was used to start taking troops home, which was pleasant duty. And then sometime after the war ended, they took the Crockett back around to the East Coast and discharged all the sailors. My father was discharged as a radioman first class. By the way, that episode with the him sticking his head out, he had been a second class radioman, and then the reports on the ship after that where he's listed again, he he was listed as a third class for a little while. He didn't tell me anything about that, but it certainly looks like he got in big trouble for being where he should have been. He didn't tell me that part of it, per se. But the Crockett was named after the city in Tennessee, I believe, that's named after Davy Crockett. So in a sense, named after Davy Crockett. It had a short but proud history, I think. Like I said earlier, my father was part of the greatest generation. He was only a small part of it, but he was a part of it, and I wish that he had left more memories behind of his time in the Navy. I wish there were more I could talk about what he did, but he was proud of his Navy time. There was a picture that hung downstairs in our house when I was a kid of him in his uniform. He was a third class at the time. This looked like one of those pictures that they took it and then they made it look like a painted portrait, because I guess they used paint to colorize it, all that. His plank owner certificate was down there also from the Crockett, and he certainly hung on to that stuff, but he never joined the American Legion or any of those things. He was very busy. He left the Navy and used the GI Bill to go to the University of Miami and got his degree as a social worker, and then went on to get his master's degree as a social worker, and worked for the state of New Jersey, rose up to be the chief of the Bureau of Children's Services, which is what they called it before it was DYFS, Division of Youth and Family Services. He continued to work for them for a while, but there were other people put on top of him. I think he was proud that he served, but like a lot of other people from his generation, just did not talk much about it.